Sir Alex Fleming was a British bacteriologist, was working on staphylococcus, such as staph infections. A colleague down the hall from him in the same building was working with penicillin, which is a fungus that makes penicillin. Series of chance occurrences and the penicillin was discovered. Chance meaning he was on vacation, he left some stuff out, the wind was blowing just right, so it's very, very odd the way it turned out. It was only because Fleming paid so close attention to his lab while he was cleaning that he was able to realize that the bacteria had been killed. Granted, it was also a result of a dirty lab, weather conditions, and other circumstances, but if it wasn't for him noticing the petri dish, he never would have discovered the effects of penicillin. Unfortunately, the overuse of penicillin has caused some bacteria to build up a resistance to the drug. This is actually predicted by Fleming himself in 1945. Let's take a quick look at the functional groups. There are a couple of amides on the left and in the center. There's an ether on the lower left, and a carboxylic acid. Drugs are often classified in two different categories: those that cause a physiological response to the body, and those that kill the foreign invading organisms. The physiological response to drugs typically initiate or block a chemical action that generates a cellular response, such as nerve impulse, synthesis of a protein. Some examples are aspirin, anti-cancer drugs, and morphine. Those that kill foreign invading organisms do so by inhibiting an essential chemical process in the infecting organism. Some examples of these are antibiotics and antifungal agents. Many drugs are very specific to fight against a particular disease or infection. To do this, we need to look at what is happening at a cellular level. We can take an example of looking at a cell membrane. Cell membranes are selectively permeable. They will let in some compounds or ions, but not others. Sometimes in order to enter the cell, the substance has to fit inside a part of a membrane like a puzzle piece or a lock and key. In fact, this is called a lock and key model. The receptor site is the lock. This is where the drug needs to fit into. The drug fits it, it unlocks an entrance to the cell. If it does not fit, the lock or receptor site keeps the membrane closed. Sometimes a drug is trying to compete with the natural substrate. A substrate is a substance whose reactions are catalyzed by an enzyme. Here you see a drug occupying the receptor site of the natural substrate. By getting to the receptor site first, the drug prevents the cell membrane from opening and allowing the bacteria to enter. This then keeps the bacteria from invading the cells. Medical chemists use this knowledge of the lock and key system of cellular entry to their advantage. When they design drugs, they take its pharmacophore into account. This is a three-dimensional arrangement of atoms or groups of atoms responsible for biological activity of a drug molecule. This can be found on page 421 if you missed that definition. Morphine is an excellent example of using a drug's pharmacophore to its advantage. The functional groups and their placement in a three-dimensional space determines to a large degree the molecule's biological activity. Notice the areas shaded in blue all have the same approximate shape. This is the shape that fits into the cell membrane's receptor sites. Computers are now used to help determine plausible drugs for certain diseases. This is called combinatorial chemistry. Which is the systematic creation of large numbers of small molecules in libraries that can be rapidly screened for in vitro for potential new drugs. There are many benefits to using this system. It's much faster than creating each product individually, cheaper, and the best compound can be produced rather inexpensively. Drugs are even more difficult to design when there are tiny differences in the molecules that may seem minuscule to you and me, but are a difference between whether or not it will fit into the receptor site of the cells. An example of this extremely small difference is chirality. Chiral. Think of it as putting gloves on. You really can't put a form-fitting glove, right-hand glove, on your left hand. You also won't be very comfortable by placing your left shoe on your right foot. This is similar to the chiral complex in the receptor site. Chiral molecules have 4 different groups attached to a central atom. A chiral molecule is non-superimposable on a mirror image, and there are a special kind of isomer called enantiomers. Enantiomers have identical physical properties. The only way we can tell them apart is by seeing their effect on a plain polarized light. The body can tell them apart, however. These 2 enantiomers have very different actions on the human body. One enantiomer fits in the receptor site, while the other one does not. The molecule on the right will have possibly no effect on the human body. A lot of times both the enantiomers will be formed in the during the production of the drug. It may be crucial to separate them before sending it out to the public. Consider these 2 enantiomers. Dextromorphin is a safe cough suppressant. Levomorphin is an additive opiate. They look alike, but because the mirror images are of one another, just like your hands or feet, they behave extremely differently. Steroids illustrate the body's form and function connection extremely well. These are a class of naturally occurring synthetic fat-soluble organic compounds that share a common carbon skeleton arrangement of 4 rings. If you missed that definition, it's on page 427 of your textbook. They regulate sexual characteristics, metabolism, and fat digestion, to name a few functions. Notice the basic structure of the steroid. It is unlike anything we have seen so far. Notice that there are 3 hexagons and 1 pentagon. This is what is meant by the carbon skeleton arrangement in 4 rings. The difference between the one steroid to the next has to do with the things atoms and groups of atoms coming off of these rings. Here are some of the different steroids and functional groups that they contain. For instance, estradiol is the female sex hormone. It contains a couple alcohols. Cortisone regulates the metabolism, contains a carboxylic acid, and a couple ketones. Let's turn this back to the consumer viewpoint. You may remember getting a prescription filled and the pharmacist asking if you wanted a generic version. A generic drug is chemically equivalent to the pioneer drug, but cannot be marketed until the patent protection on the pioneer drug has run out after 20 years. If the generic drug company can prove that it is equivalent to the original name brand drug, it has fewer hoops to jump through. It is even easier to get into the stores. The lower priced drug is commonly marketed under a generic name, in this case, Alprazolam instead of Xanax. Herbal remedies and folk medicines are very popular. This is not surprising since many plants and herbs were the starting point of many of our modern drugs. After all, nature is the best chemist. Just to mention a few, St. John's wort has been shown to help with mild depression, and licorice has been shown to help with coughs. Ephedra is another example of a herbal remedy. Ephedra has been used safely for thousands of years as herbal remedy known as mahang. In 2003, several deaths related to the ingredients led the FDA to ban ephedra products. At this time, there are ongoing discussions to make the product available again. The herb ephedra contains amphetamine-like alkaloids. Ephedrine and the less active pseudoephedrine. Pseudoephedrine is a decongestant. Ephedrine is a bronchodilator, which opens the airways, and a stimulant. In 2008, 8% of Americans reported using illicit drugs, which is one not sanctioned by law or custom, during the month prior to the survey. This included marijuana, crack, and hallucinogens. In addition to the statistics, 10 million individuals reported operating a vehicle while under the influence of one of these drugs within the last year. Over half the people in the U.S. over the age of 12 drank alcohol, and 1 out of 5 were binge drinkers. 28% of population used tobacco in some form. The Controlled Substances Act places drugs into 5 different categories. Please examine page 436 to take a closer look. You will see the government has placed marijuana into the first level, meaning that they do not believe that it has current accepted medical uses and it has a high potential of abuse. I discuss this because this is the most commonly abused one. THC, or delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, is an active drug in marijuana. Some believe that THC can affect memory, concentration, problem-solving abilities, and coordination, to mention a few. Others believe that the effect of relieving nausea, pain, and glaucoma. Its medical uses continue to be argued. The federal government is opposed. OxyCodone has been used safely for many years. But this formulation includes a time-release mechanism for a long-lasting treatment of chronic pain. Drug abusers quickly determined how to get around the time release and were able to rapidly ingest large amounts of oxycodone. The effects were said to be similar to heroin. Oxycodone was overprescribed in the Appalachian Mountains in the late 90s and early 2000s. Many became addicted because of this. It is now a highly regulated drug. Our book has described a few drugs. There are thousands of legal and illegal drugs out there. It is not only the government and pharmacists' responsibility, but it is also up to the consumer to take responsibility for making safe choices.